Hello, and on behalf of the League of Women Voters, I would like to welcome you to this Colorado 3rd Congressional District candidate interview. My name is Wendy Pollock, and I'm on the board of directors of the La Plata County chapter and a resident of Durango. The League of Women Voters is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that does not support or oppose candidates or political parties. Our mission is to empower voters and to defend democracy. Also with us is journalist Sarah Flower, who will serve as our interviewer. Sarah is a freelance journalist with extensive experience in nonpartisan coverage of the important issues affecting Southwest and Western Colorado. And thank you, Sarah, for working with the League on this unique opportunity for voters to learn about the candidates for this congressional seat. The 3rd Congressional District, also known as CD3, is the largest geographical district in Colorado. The district includes most of rural Western Slope and the western 1/3 of the state. It encompasses 29 counties, including numerous cities and towns, as well as unincorporated communities. CD3 is also home to 2 Native American tribes, the Mountain Ute tribe and the Southern Ute tribe. The population of our district is just over 750,000 based on the 2020 census. CD3 is one of 8 congressional districts in Colorado. Candidate interviews will be available for on-demand viewing via the League of Women Voters Colorado.org, vote411.org, public radio stations and media outlets throughout the district, and through the League's websites within CD3. This interview may not be recorded without express permission of the League of Women Voters. No excerpts may be used in any form by individuals, candidates, or political parties. Each of the candidates will be asked the same questions so viewers can compare and contrast responses from the candidates. The questions were gathered across CD3 and vetted by a nonpartisan committee of League of Women Voters members to represent a cross-section of the district. The views expressed during this interview are those of the candidates and not those of the League of Women Voters or the interviewer. If you have any additional questions for the candidates, we encourage you to contact them directly. And joining us for this interview is Jeff Hurd from the Republican Party. So let's begin, Sarah, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Wendy. The goal of this interview is to present the views of the candidates seeking the CD3 seat in a fair, nonpartisan setting so that you, the voter, can make an informed decision. No candidates have been given the questions in advance. I encourage you to listen carefully to the candidates' responses. Did they answer the question? Does their response indicate an understanding of the issue? Each candidate will be given 2 minutes to answer each question. In addition, we have a set of yes or no lightning round questions. For the lightning round, candidates will also be allowed 1 sentence of explanation. Candidates will have 3 minutes at the end to answer our final question as a closing statement. Jeff Hurd, you ready?
I'm ready. Thank you so much, Sarah. It's great to be here. Wendy, good to meet you as well.
Great. Let's begin. Question 1. In the current presidential race, both candidates are proposing strategies for reducing the rising cost of living. What specific ideas would you propose, Jeff, that Congress could act on to help residents of CD3 and the country cope with rising costs? You have 2 minutes.
That's a great question. It's something that I've heard consistently on the campaign trail, the cost of living. I was talking to a police officer in Durango in the southwest part of the district, and he was talking about how difficult it is just to afford a home based on his officer's salary there. So, and he had to live way, way, way outside the community just to afford a place to live. So I know that that is something that is a critical concern for people across the district. The things that I can think of, first, we need to look at the inputs for the cost of housing. We need to look at the cost of the lumber, the cost of the steel, those sorts of inputs. Any sort of tariffs or government regulations that are adding costs are ultimately passed down to the home buyer. And so we need to look at those inputs and look at ways that we can make sure those additional costs are not getting layered in unnecessarily. Also, one of the hidden taxes, one of the hidden costs when it comes to housing and housing development is the cost of energy. That operates as functionally a hidden tax on everything. And so an energy policy that's sound, that lowers costs, that makes energy efficient, reliable, affordable, is something that will also result in lower housing costs. Specifically, when it comes to national issues as well, I would think of electrical codes and national building codes. Those keep on getting revised, particularly when it comes to energy efficiency guidelines, in a way that I don't think ultimately benefits the consumer based on the amount of regulations and changes that are being put in. And so you have houses that have multiple thousands of dollars that are being added in order to account for renewable energy codes that I don't think are efficient and I don't think make much sense, and that are constantly changing. So it's difficult to predict what is going to be on the regulatory horizon when it comes to those sorts of regulations. Mobile home housing, that's something that I think that the federal government has had a role in. I think we can do more to make um, mobile homes an opportunity for people that are first-time home buyers that want to sort of get their foot in the door when it comes to owning a home, which really is the American dream. And
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 we
then
are past
also
our 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay, all right. So those are the things that
Sorry.
I can think
I'm
of.
sorry.
A state issue and a local issue certainly, but there are ways that the federal government can help as well.
Thank you. Affordable housing, which you touched on, is a huge problem for residents of Colorado and across the country. Is there a role for the federal government in establishing programs for income qualified home buyers and renters, creating affordable housing tax incentives for home builders, and or imposing tax penalties for non-resident owners?
Could you say that one more time, Sarah?
Sure. Is there a role for the federal government in establishing programs for income qualified home buyers and renters, creating affordable housing tax incentives for home builders, and or imposing tax penalties for non-resident owners?
I'm not in favor of opposing tax penalties for non-resident owners. I believe the market should generally decide those things. I am in favor of tax incentives and incentives that we would give builders that are looking to build what I would call attainable housing and growing the supply. I mean, fundamentally, when it comes to housing supply, we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to grow the number of homes that we have, the number of units that we have out there, and providing tax incentives to builders who are looking to construct those sorts of homes and dwellings, I think is something that I would definitely support. Also, tax incentives help when it comes to the mortgage interest deduction as well. Those sorts of things when it comes to consumers and home buyers, home owners as well, extending those tax policies, absolutely. So yes, certainly on the housing supply side, making sure that our developers are incentivized to build the sorts of homes that young families and single individuals are able to purchase and get their sort of foothold in the market are things that I would definitely support. I am less in favor of penalizing individuals that don't happen to live in a home 100% of the time in the year.
Question 3. The Inflation Reduction Act was a good first step towards addressing the climate crisis. What do you see as Congress's next step to continue addressing the climate crisis and reducing global warming gases from being emitted and the negative impacts felt by farmers and ranchers?
Sure. Well, I think the Inflation Reduction Act is a bit of a misnomer. It was quite a bit of a spending there that happened in that bill, and a lot of it was subsidies to green energy companies, which I'm not necessarily opposed to government providing certain subsidies for energy developers. I think there was a lot of wasteful spending that was in that bill, though. I think there's some reform that still can be done with the unspent dollars that are in that legislation. I do know that, for instance, in Colorado, there are some opportunities for using those Inflation Reduction Act funds in a way that would help construct energy projects and hopefully lower the cost of energy for rural Coloradans. But fundamentally, I think what we need to be doing to address climate change and to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions is doing everything we can to produce as much energy as possible from the United States and specifically from Western and Southern Colorado. If you genuinely care about reducing global greenhouse gas emissions, then you ought to support getting as much energy out of Western and Southern Colorado as possible. That includes not only some of the cleanest, highest BTU, lowest mercury, lowest sulfur coal in the world, which is used to build the concrete that's in our highways, the steel that's in our buildings. It's even used to build the wind turbines, construct the wind turbines that we're constructing as well, but also natural gas and oil. And then also nuclear is something that I think we need to be looking at. And any energy policy that does not include nuclear, I don't think is a serious energy policy, particularly when we're talking about reducing the carbon intensity of our generation. We are taking reliable baseload generation offline and replacing it with intermittent wind and solar. That I don't have any objection to wind and solar, but we just need to make sure that we have resources that are adequate to provide the energy that we need, particularly in a growing economy with data centers coming online and so forth. The electricity demand needs to be met by reliable and adequate resources, and that's what I would support in Congress.
Thank you. We're going to switch gears here a little bit to certainly a hot button issue across the country, which is immigration reform. And there has been no new immigration reform that's been enacted by Congress in many years. If elected, what would you specifically advocate for or against to address immigration reform? You have 2 minutes.
That is absolutely true. It's been, I think, about 40 years since we've accomplished any sort of comprehensive immigration reform. And I will tell you, this is something that I think is one of the top issues. Immigration and securing our border is probably the top issue in the 3rd Congressional District when I'm traveling around, and addressing the flow of illegal immigration and crime and drugs that are coming across our border. The first step from my perspective is securing the border. I don't think we can have a rational immigration policy without having a secure border. And so we need to make sure that we finish the wall and finish the infrastructure that provides that national security, that economic security, and that promotes the rule of law on our southern border. We need to do a better job, frankly, also of making sure that we are addressing the fentanyl that's coming through via legal ports of entry. That's actually the greatest flow of drugs is coming through legal ports of entry. We need to do a better job of targeting that scourge that is coming into our communities and making sure that we stop that flow, not only of people coming across the border illegally, but drugs and crime as well. We need to reform our asylum system. We have a deeply broken asylum system that takes way too long. DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, is paroling individuals into our country, and they're waiting for 5, 6, 7 years before their hearing date. It does not make sense. We need to make sure that we not only fund border security and border patrol and law enforcement on the border, but also make sure that our asylum system is updated and that we have adequate resources to make sure that people who are claiming asylum, that those claims are vetted promptly and swiftly. And that we also need to tighten up the rules. I think there's maybe a little bit of abuse that's happening with the asylum system. People know the magic words to say in order to stay here for a certain number of years. We need to tighten that up as well. So those are the sorts of things that I would look at when it comes to reforming our immigration system.
Thank you. Question number 5. Do you think that the federal government should have a role in education in our country? Please explain your views.
I do. I think the federal government maybe has too much of a role now. I would prefer to empower parents in local communities and states with the primary responsibility when it comes to education, with even more responsibility. I'm concerned that we are sometimes moving too much money and decision-making and authority to the federal government, to Washington, D.C. But I would say I would disagree with those who say that the federal government should have no role in education policy. I think, particularly given our economy, particularly given the global nature and of geopolitically in which we're living now, we need to make sure that we have a federal government that is focused on developing a national education policy or that is keeping us competitive in the global economy. And in that sense, I do believe that the federal government and a streamlined Department of Education, I do not favor abolishing the Department of Education. I do favor reforming it significantly and streamlining it. And one of the critical roles I think they could play would be making sure that we are educating students, that we're advancing an education policy that keeps up with the Chinese, that keeps up with the Russians, that keeps up with our adversaries in Iran, and that we're making sure that we're incentivizing school districts and universities to educate students in a way that positions us to continue to be the global leader, not just economically, but also militarily and culturally in the world as well. So I do believe that the issue of education should be primarily left to mostly local governments and local school districts in the states. But at the same time, I do believe the federal government does have a more limited role in making sure that education policy is advancing the national interests of the United States in a way that no one individual school district or state would otherwise be considering.
Thank you. Another hot button issue we're trying to get to a lot of them is given the increase in school and other mass shootings, what steps would you take to lower the rate of gun-related violence in our country?
Well, it certainly is. Gun-related violence certainly is a tragic issue, and it's something that I know we see about in the news, and even one time is too frequently. I think the key from my perspective is enforcing the laws that we have on the books. And I don't know that we're always doing that when it comes to gun issues. We need to make sure that the mental health component of this issue is one that's addressed. My father was a psychologist, and so I heard a lot about growing up about the mental health components of healthcare and making sure that we're taking care of people. The mental health piece is also big. And so when it comes to laws, I think the key from my perspective would be we need to enforce the laws that are on the books. And we need to make sure that we're keeping communities safe, but that we're also protecting the fundamental constitutional rights of responsible gun owners. And that's something that in Congress I will certainly champion and fight for is we need to make sure that our communities are safe. We need to keep guns out of the hands of bad guys. But we also cannot infringe on the fundamental self-defense rights that individuals have under the Second Amendment.
One last question, and you touched on it a little bit with mental health. In many parts of our district, the healthcare and mental health care needs of all residents are not being met. Do you envision a time when a single-payer healthcare system might be the most effective and equitable method of delivering affordable and quality care for the American public? If not, why? And if so, how do you think we could get there?
Well, I don't believe in single payer care, and I think you can look at other countries that have it and see the serious shortcomings that come from it, and come from socialized medicine. My wife comes from communist Czechoslovakia, and even there you can tell you the experience of socialized medicine in a country like that. And I realize that's a number of years ago, communism, but even today, I think you can look at other countries where what essentially happens is you have socialized healthcare where those who can afford it end up paying a lot more to get the care that they need, and the rest of the people are simply left behind by a system that's broken. My perspective would be I realize it's not perfect. It's not, you can't say the market, when it comes to healthcare, just saying let the market decide everything doesn't quite work right. Like I have 5 children, and if my son breaks his arm and I need to go to the emergency room, I'm not going to call the various hospitals and say, hey, what does it cost to get a broken arm set? You just go to the place that is closest and that will get you the care that you need right away. So to say that the market is a perfect solution to this is not accurate. But I do think that increasing transparency, pricing transparency in the market is something that would advance our healthcare, the provision of quality healthcare. I mean, we spend 20% of our GDP, more than 20% of our GDP on healthcare, and I don't think we're getting adequate use of those dollars. Increasing pricing transparency, also aligning incentives with individuals so that the cost of care and making sure that the results that we're getting from that care align with the cost that we're spending on that. And having consumers have some skin in the game with respect to that, I think would also be an important advance forward to improving healthcare. So transparency and cost incentive and alignment are things that I think would be important for healthcare provision. And I think I got in under the 2 minutes there.
Yeah.
I'm timing myself there, Wendy, so you don't have to interrupt me.
No, that's great. And that concludes the 2-minute portion of the question. Up next is my favorite, the lightning round. So these are yes or no questions, and you can have one sentence to elaborate if needed. You ready, Jeff?
I'm ready.
Okay. Number 1, are you in favor of a path to citizenship for immigrants defined as dreamers who are living in our country?
I am in favor of that, and I would support a process that makes sure that they have no criminal history, that they've been engaged and positive citizens of their communities.
Do you support term limits for the Supreme Court?
I do not support term limits for the Supreme Court. I think it's important that the judicial branch has that independence.
Do you support raising the national minimum wage?
I do not think that's necessary. Particularly here in Colorado, we already have a minimum wage that's well in excess of a national minimum wage. I prefer the market sets that wage.
Given the issues surrounding campaign finance, would you support the proposed legislation, the Disclose Act, that would provide disclosure of campaign spending and combat the use of so-called dark money in U.S. elections?
Oh my gosh. I will tell you, as a first-time candidate, campaign finance is such a crazy area. I'm not familiar enough with the Disclose Act. I'm not able to commit to something I haven't even read. But certainly, I think there is improvement in terms of disclosure and disclosing where money comes from. Yes, I'm in favor of conceptually improving that when it comes to campaign finance.
Are you in favor of using federal lands for the construction of affordable housing?
I think in some places it could be, yes, worth considering.
Would you support the Equal Rights Amendment becoming the 28th Amendment?
Uh, the Equal Rights Amendment becoming the 28th Amendment. I have not given that too much thought. I would need to read what that amendment is. It's been a while since I've seen that amendment. So I'm not sure I'm able to answer that as I sit here right now. It's like you're asking me if I would support the Disclose Act, something I haven't read. I haven't read the Equal Rights Amendment in a long time. So I would need to look at that. But I'm not sure where that stands. I know that was something that was discussed, I think in the 70s. I'm not sure it's been picked up since then.
Do you support the passage of the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act that would strengthen legal protections against discriminatory voting policies and practices?
What's the status of that law?
I'm not sure at the moment. Wendy, do you know?
I think it's pending in legislation, yes.
Okay. It's really hard for me to talk about something that you're just giving me the name of the act. What were you saying that it was supporting again?
It's the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, and it would strengthen legal protections against discriminatory voting policies and practices.
Well, I would certainly support strengthening the outlawing of illegal discriminatory voting practices. So I'm not sure what that specific bill is, but if there's legislation out there that is aimed at cracking down on preventing intimidation and preventing people from exercising the franchise and their rights to vote, then certainly that's something I would support.
Last one. Are you in favor of a national policy of protecting abortion rights?
I do not believe that this issue should be a federal issue. I believe it should be generally left to the states. So I'm pro-life with exceptions, but I do believe that this issue should be left to the states. And for that reason, I would be opposed to a national abortion ban, and I would also be opposed to a national law that implements a permissive abortion policy.
All right, that does the lightning round. Now we have our final question. We've just covered several issues on a range of topics. In your opinion, Jeff Hurd, what are the top 3 issues facing our congressional district, and briefly describe how you plan to address these issues if elected?
Sure. The top issue is securing the border. That's something that's clear to me. We need to stop the flow of drugs and crime that are coming across the border. I say this is somebody that is very much in favor of legal immigration. My wife is a legal immigrant. Like I mentioned, she's from originally Czechoslovakia. But we are a nation of immigrants, but we're also a nation of laws. And we need to make sure that we are following the law when it comes to immigration. And I'm in favor of a robust immigration policy that encourages migrants to come and become American citizens, but we got to do it the right way. So that's a top priority for me. And we cannot have a rational immigration policy without first securing the border. So that's fundamental from my perspective. And I know that that's something that voters in the 3rd Congressional District agree with me on. The second issue is energy and energy independence, making sure that we are growing our energy economy. We talked about global greenhouse gas emissions before. If we genuinely want to reduce those emissions, we ought to support getting as much energy, reliable, environmentally responsibly produced energy out of Colorado as possible. And we need to make sure that we reduce those regulations that are preventing that. And then the last issue for me is protecting water and agriculture. I grew up a city kid here in Grand Junction, surrounded by agriculture, not appreciating all that farmers and ranchers do to feed our families. and protecting their livelihoods. They contribute so much to our economy. They contribute so much to our environment, and they're part of the fabric of who we are as Western and Southern Coloradans. Making sure that they have the water that is the lifeblood of their industry is a top priority for me. So opposing any water export projects, making sure that we keep water in the 3rd Congressional District is something that I've on the record consistently supported from the very beginning of my campaign. So securing the border, energy, and protecting water and agriculture are my top priorities.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff Hurd, representing the Republican Party for the 3rd Congressional District. We appreciate you meeting with us today and sharing your views on the range of issues. We're going to switch it over to Wendy to close us out from the League of Women Voters.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Jeff. In closing, the League of Women Voters would like to remind those watching or listening to this interview that the views expressed are those of the candidate and not those of the League of Women Voters or the interviewer. Prior to casting your vote, we encourage all voters to learn more, do their own research on any of the statements made by candidates during this interview. To find out more about the candidates' positions on issues, we recommend that you visit vote411.org, ballotpedia.org, the League of Women Voters Colorado.org, and the websites of your local chapter of League of Women Voters. We encourage you to check these resources frequently as we get closer to Election Day, as they will have additional information. Ballots are scheduled to be mailed October 11th. If you do not receive your ballot by mid-October, contact your county clerk. Election Day is November 5th. You can also go on to govotecolorado.gov to check your registration status. Remember, how you vote is up to you. We encourage voters to vote in every election and to be as well informed as possible when casting the ballot. Well, that concludes our interview. Thanks for watching and listening, and thank you for being an engaged citizen.
Thank you both so much. This was a pleasure.